your car? Again? Studies show you're not alone. That's right. I think we're engaged. We have lost Rod.
Well, shalom, everyone, and welcome to our Shabbat night lesson. Let's see what it is telling me to do here. All right. Welcome to our Shabbat night lesson. Um, we have ended Shabbat, but we are grateful that we have this opportunity to have a lesson that is going to deal with the Hebrew word Vayeshev. And we're going to break that down and break down the concepts of Vayeshev for you and have a great study in our session for tonight. So I want to welcome you and I want to thank you for joining me either here in our room here in this hotel, which you see in the background, where my wife has joined us and my sister has joined, and others that will join and be a part of this lesson, either at this time or sometime after it is posted on our YouTube channel. So we want to thank you all for joining us, and we are going to wait maybe 1 minute and then get started. We have an exciting lesson for tonight. So much information that we can use. We always want to remember that the information that we have is to make it easier for us to do the practical application of the concepts that we learn and apply them to our everyday life. And so we endeavor to make certain that in our lesson, then we'll have the Haftarah lesson from um, the prophets, and then we'll have a Brit Hadasha quote from the New Testament that we will utilize in our lesson on tonight. Also, we're going to be dealing with some quotes from the book of Jubilees. And so we have an exciting lesson that is so much information. We're going to be talking about the priestly line. And remember, the priestly line was normally supposed to be the firstborn son. But we'll see in our lesson on tonight that Jacob makes his 11th born son, Joseph, the priest of the family. And of course, that brought a whole lot of consternation from his brothers and all kinds of plots and schemes that were utilized. And it reminds us that that is what Jacob did to his father, um, to Isaac, in getting the blessing, the priestly blessing from his father Isaac through deception. We're going to see where a goat was killed to prepare a meal for Yaakov or Jacob in his pursuit um, for the priestly blessing. So we also see that we're going to get into Tamar, one of the wives of the sons of Yehuda or Judah, and how a goat had to do something with her. So we see these similarities throughout the text, and we're also going to that help us then understand what and how to apply that to each and every one of our lives. So we're going to get ready we're going to pray and then get started with our lesson and get into our shared screen. Heavenly Father, we bless you for this day. This is the day that you have made. We rejoice. We are glad in it. We thank you for the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit that comes to guide us in our lesson. opening up our hearts and minds to receive all that will be imparted to us through this lesson on tonight. So we bless you and praise you for all you do. And it's in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord, Savior, and King, we pray this prayer. Amen. All right, with that, let's get to our shared screen and get into our lesson. I hope the lighting and everything is going to be satisfactory. It looks good on my screen. I don't know about yours, but it looks good on my screen. So I'm going to assume that I'm not quite sure what's going on now with this. Let's see. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. All right. So let's get to our shared screen and we'll get to our slideshow presentation. Okay, so this is lesson 9 out of 52 lessons that'll get us through the first 5 books of the Bible in 1 year. The title is Vayeshev, and he dwelt. And so we see this concept, Vasalak. So we see that and he, and he dwelt, and he went. And so we see this, and he sent. So we've seen this particular aspect of Hebrew in the Vaye. We've seen that. And so now we're getting into the third of our lessons using that beginning to a word, and it is, and he dwelt. That is Genesis 37, verse 1, all the way to Genesis 40, verse 23. This is not the 12th, this is the 13th, but I was traveling on the 12th, and we did run into snow and traffic and everything else, and I knew I didn't believe we would be able to do our class on normally a Friday night, so that's why we added this time. So with that, I am going to get into um, our first slide. See if I have any other information I wanted to introduce. Now we'll go on. Let's go on. Okay. Now this first slide, once again, is just to kind of demonstrate where all this was going on. There is Shechem. I'm circling that now. Hope you can see that. But I'm circling Shechem because it's a central part of our story today. And then we're going to have some traders coming in on basically what we see is kind of a trade route that came in over the Jordan at this point and would go down into the land of Egypt in that manner. And we're going to see that is central to our story on today. So I think you're going to enjoy our lesson. And since it's kind of now, this is one of the few times that the scriptures take on kind of a story format. So we couldn't just pick up one little part of the story and then post it because it's a story format. So we go from one aspect of the story to the other. So we pretty much included all of that in what we're going to be dealing with on today. Make sure you mute yourself. I see Halifu as he came on. Make sure you mute yourself because I heard a little feedback when you came on. So with that, that's important for us to understand because we're going to have traders coming in to our lesson on today, and a lot is going on right around Shechem. So with that, let's get to our first slide, and which will be dealing with our what? Our companion study. Remember, the Hebrew word haftarah means companion. So it's an aspect of study that deals with the basic understanding of, or the theme of our lesson for tonight. And as we're talking about dwelling, then we're going to see that throughout our lesson for today, but specifically in our Haftarah in the book of Amos, we're going to see that the whole concept of the love that Jacob had for Joseph, the love that Jehovah the Creator has for the children of Israel, and we're going to see that be embodied in what the prophet Amos had to say in the text of our Haftarah on Vayeshev. So as we look at that, it goes from Amos chapter 2, verse 6, all the way to chapter 3, verse 8. Here is what Jehovah says. For Israel's 3 crimes, no 4, I will not reverse it. The 3 crimes were sexual impropriety. This is basically what we're talking about now, is the northern kingdom. All right, remember that the kingdom was split in 2. Shechem had something to do with that, because it was split in at Shechem Point, so that we go down to Jerusalem and for Benjamin, and then all the kingdoms to the north of Shechem would then be the kingdoms of what was called Israel or Ephraim at that time. So when he says that there were 3 crimes they committed, it was sexual impropriety. They were having adultery and all other kinds of sexual impropriety, idolatry, as they were continuing to worship idols in the north. Remember, when the northern kingdom split from the southern kingdom, 10 tribes went with the north, 2 went with the southern kingdom. The 10 tribes of the north hosted calves that were symbolic, the same problem that they had at Mount Sinai later. So we see all of this had transpired, and for that, the Assyrians came and took the northern kingdom away, never for them to return. So as it says, he says, I will not reverse it, because they sell the upright for silver and the poor for a pair of doves. So the final problem was not just the 3 crimes that Jehovah was trying to teach them not to do, but then they began to deal with innocents, orphans, and the poor. And anytime you deal with that, there's going to be something that transpires, because the main function of this society, of the nation of Israel that it was going to be developed for, was to make sure that that did not happen. And even though those people existed, they were supposed to be taken care of by those who were very wealthy. He says, grinding the heads of the poor into dust and pushing the lowly out of the way. Father and son sleep with the same girl. That's the what? Sexual impropriety. Profaning my holy name. Lying down beside any altar on clothes taken in pledge. Drinking wine in the house of their Elohim. Brought with fines they imposed. Remember, they made their own temples up there. And these temples had these big statues of bulls outside, and this was an abomination. But their treatment of one another was the inline that said, that's it. You are going into captivity. He said, I destroyed the Amorites before them. Though tall as cedars and strong as oaks, I destroyed their fruit above and their root below. So they were destroyed completely. More than that, I brought you up from Egypt, led you 40 years in the desert, so that you could have the Amorites' land. We go on and continue, and it says, I raised up some of your sons to be prophets, other young men of yours to be Nazarim or Nazarites. People of Israel, isn't it true, asked Jehovah, but you gave the Nazarim wine to drink and ordered the prophets, don't prophesy? So basically, a Nazarite was a what? The vow or the pledge was not to mess with any grape products. So that's what they would do during this period of a Nazarite vow. Well, in this situation, they were reversing that and doing what they wanted to do. The book of Leviticus specifically points out what they had been instructed to do. And as we were going through our earlier lessons, we were showing you the graph to show you how this was passed down from one generation to the next. So it wasn't that they didn't know the word, just as it is today. It isn't that we don't know the word, but it's that we don't live the word, and the word is being twisted, just as it was here in verse 12, where it says, "You gave Nazarene wine to drink." Well, that's the way the scriptures have been twisted for us, so that we don't really understand what they are saying. Once again, we're going from one language to the next, from one culture to another culture to another culture to another culture. And then we begin to make cultural exceptions to the word. The very same thing that got the northern kingdom kicked out of the land actually forever until Messiah returns. Then in chapter 3, it says, "Listen to this word which Jehovah has spoken against you, people of Israel, against the entire family that I brought up from the land of Egypt. Of all the families on earth, only you have I intimately known." Once again, it gets into that whole concept of not being more than anyone else, but a people chosen for a particular purpose. We see that in our lesson today with Joseph or Joseph. He says, "This is why I will punish you for all your crimes." Do two people travel together without having so agreed? Does a lion roar in the forest when it has no prey? Does a young lion growl in his lair? If it has caught nothing, then if we complete our Haftarah, it says, "Does a bird get caught in a trap on the ground if it hasn't been baited? Does a trap spring up from the ground when it has taken nothing? When the shofar is blown in the city, don't the people tremble? Can disaster befall a city without Jehovah's having done it?" So he said, I'm not going to reverse what happens to people who do what you did. I'm not going to reverse it. And therefore, the northern kingdom went into captivity, even though prophets were sent to them to tell them to stop doing what they were doing. He goes on to say, Jehovah Elohim does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. It's the same thing we have with the prophet Moshe and the Torah, the first 5 books of the scriptures, in that he is revealing to us the plan that Jehovah has said. So when we look at that, failure to do what we're supposed to do always results in a prophetic word coming to us, telling us that there's going to be calamities that are going to come upon us. And these calamities have been shown to us, told to us, and the mercy and grace of God has kept them from befalling us until we get to that point where he says no more. He goes on in verse 8 to say, "The lion has roared, and who will not fear? Jehovah Elohim has spoken, who will not prophesy?" And so the whole concept of this love of Jacob or Yaakov for his son Joseph, the whole concept of the love of the Creator for the nation of Israel that he developed based on a promise he gave to Abraham, and part of the prophecy that is written so that we as believers in Yeshua who were grafted in to the promises of the nation of Israel, as we are part of Israel, all of that dictates to us the necessity to be obedient to those things that we are learning as we study his word. And he has sent word to us. And the final word, well, I shouldn't say final word, but when we read the book of Hebrews, In times past, he spoke one way. Now he's given us Messiah. So Messiah has been seen. That is, Yeshua has been seen. He came, he died, he's going to return. So judgment will be delivered to everyone through Yeshua HaMashiach or Yeshua our Messiah. Then in our companion study in the Brit Hadasha, we go to Acts, and even though it's chapter 7, verses 9 through 16, we're going to do chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. It says, now the patriarch, this is Shaul, or actually Luke, writing about the teachings that were given to the children of Israel through the apostles. Now the patriarchs grew jealous of Joseph and sold him into slavery in Egypt. But Jehovah was with him. He rescued him from all his troubles and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who appointed him chief administrator over Egypt and over all his household. This is Stephen teaching the nation before. This is Stephen who is a prophet that was sent to them to correct them. And once again, they refused to do that. But in the transition of killing him, we find Shaul or Paul becomes the forerunner of the prophets to the Gentiles. So then it goes on to say in verse 11, now there came a famine that caused much suffering throughout Egypt and Canaan. So in the Brit Hadasha, it's relating to this. Stephen is relating the story of the history and how he's pointing out that Yeshua is Messiah. And that got him killed. And so we see that the whole concept of Joseph telling the truth about dreams he was having, whether or not it was wisdom in how he presented it and when he presented it, but he did warn of a coming famine. He did warn his family that this priestly robe that he had been given and this understanding from his father was to be taken seriously. And yet, what did they want to do? The same thing they did to Stephen, that his brothers desired to kill him. And the leaders of Israel at that time decided to kill Stephen. And that's what they did. So that is the companion studies brought into our lesson, which is really in the form of a story that we will get into right now. So as we read, and once again, I'm going to have to pretty much read because it's a story, and it doesn't quite make it if we don't just follow it line upon line and precept upon precept. Jacob, Jacob, continued living in the land where his father had lived as a foreigner, the land of Canaan. Here is the history of Yaakov. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to pasture the flock with his brothers, even though he was still a boy. 17 was considered a boy. You weren't a man until you got into your 20s. Once, when he was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, remember those were the sisters that were maidservants to Leah and Rachel. His father's wives, he brought a bad report about them to their father. So he basically told their father what they were doing. And for them, it was bad, but the report was true. Now, Israel loved Joseph the most of all his children because he was the son of his old age. Remember, he was number 11 and was the child of the woman that he most desired to marry. And he was tricked into marrying Leah, and that brought about what we've studied already to this point. He goes on to say, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they began to hate him and reached the point where they couldn't even talk with him in a civil manner. So now this jealousy, this hatred very parallel to what happened with Yeshua when he came on the scene. So we see that the parallel of the life of Yosef and the parallel of the life of Yeshua is going to take on many aspects of that are very similar. Yosef had a dream, which he told his brothers, and that made them hate him all the more. He said to them, listen, while I tell you about this dream of mine. Once it points out up here that he was still kind of young in his thinking, but one of the things about Joseph was being his father's favorite, then he was able to do what? Stay around him a lot and be taught by him the things that his father had been taught by Isaac, his father, and Abraham, his grandfather. And so he understands the importance of a dream, but the manner in which he's phrasing it might not be a good thing. We were tying up bundles of wheat in the field when suddenly my bundle got up by itself and stood upright. Then your bundles came, gathered around mine, and prostrated themselves before it. His brothers retorted, yes, you will certainly be our king. You'll do a great job of bossing us around. And they hated him still more for his dreams and for what he said. He had another dream, which he told his brothers. Here, I had another dream, and there were the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrating themselves before me. He told his father too, as well as his brothers, but his father rebuked him. What is this dream you have had? Do you really expect me, your mother, and your brothers to come and prostrate ourselves before you on the ground? So we hear what Yaakov is saying. However, look at what he says. He says, your mother and your brothers. So he says, do you expect me, your mother, who's already dead? So he's kind of hinting to him or trying to help his brothers understand that, okay, this is not something you need to hold on to. However, at the same time, it says his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So even though his brothers were jealous of him, his father kept the matter in mind. That's very important for us to understand. So when you look at your outline, you will notice that the jealousy, favoritism, all of those things, how much that correlates with what happened with Yeshua, because it was the religious leaders of the time that were jealous of him, that saw all that he had done, but refused to humble themselves and acknowledge that the Creator was at work and doing something among them. The same as the brothers refused to acknowledge the fact that they were doing things contrary to the word, and Yosef was reminding them, even though he was of the importance of dreams and the importance of doing what is right. And so that's what we see in the first part of our session on tonight. In the second part of our session, which will be Genesis 31, verses 12 through 22, we're going to see how Yaakov realizes where his sons had gone to mine the cattle in Shechem. Now remember, Shechem was the city that they went in and completely destroyed or killed all the males, and then took captives all their cattle, all their belongings, took everything they had. They did not burn the city to the ground or completely destroy it, so others could come behind them and live there. But the herds and flocks and everything else, they maintained outside the city of Shechem. And so this is important for us to understand. So let's get into the second part of our session tonight, and that's chapter 37, verses 12 through 22. After this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, see, once again, that they had destroyed Shechem. Remember, they had to leave that area for what they had done. But Jehovah put the fear among all the people around that area so that they would not attack Yaakov and his children. So now they're going back to Shechem, which was several days' journey from where they were in Hebron to Shechem. But they could still go and frolic there because other people could have come in and settled there. After this, when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's sheep in Shechem, Israel asked Joseph, now remember, Israel is Yaakov or Jacob, aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. He answered, here I am. He said to him, go now, see whether things are going well with your brothers and with the sheep, and bring word back to me. So he sent him away from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. Then it says, and we highlighted this, where a man found him wandering around in the countryside. Most studies and understanding would be that this was an angel, and the angel was there to protect him and give him information. And that's what this man, how could a man just find him and then give him information that he needed? The man asked him, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, he answered. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the sheep? The man said, they've left here because I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And so we can, once again, we're getting more information about what's going on. So this, even though the Creator knows all and everything that's going on, he will do different things, which we read in our Torah. There are angels, there are prophets, there are different things that he institutes to bring about his desired end throughout, even though man has a will and can do things that he would want to do, and most of the time that is outside of what the word tells them. In verse 18, it says, they spotted him in the distance, and before he had arrived where they were, they had already plotted to kill him. They said to each other, look, this dreamer is coming. Remember, they know the importance of dreams. Interpretation is another thing. You can come up with a faulty interpretation, but that doesn't negate the value of dreams. So now they said, look, the dreamer is coming. So come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those water cisterns here. Then we'll say some wild animal devoured him. We'll see then what becomes of his dreams. So now their intent on killing their brother. But when Reuben heard this, he saved him from being destroyed by them. He said, we shouldn't take his life. Don't shed blood, Reuben added. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilds, but don't lay hands on him yourselves. And he intended to rescue him from them later and restore him to his father. Reuben wants to get back in good graces because he had basically raped, primarily we learned from Jubilees, the Bilhah. And so that he wanted to get back into the good graces so that the priestly blessing would go to him. Then we get into the third part of our session, which will be chapter 37, and it's verses 23 through 26. And to 26, see that they didn't kill him. Judah even intervened more, and he was sent down into Egypt. So the plan was he was going to Egypt to do what? We'll find out later on from Yosef himself, to save many lives. In the third part of our session, beginning in verse 23, it reads, so it was that when Joseph arrived to be with his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long sleeve robe. Remember, his father loved him so much, he gave him this robe, which was really symbolic of the priestly lineage, and took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty without any water in it. Well, if they said it's empty, then of course it didn't have any water in it. But according to many stories that are added to this lesson, there were snakes and scorpions had gone into the pit, but they were not allowed to touch Joseph. Then they sat down to eat their meal. But as they looked up, now they threw him into this pit that was really a system where water would gather, where they would store water for feeding of flocks or something like that. They put him there and then went to eat, sit down and eat, even though they had this bad intent for their brother. They saw in front of them a caravan of Ishmaelim or Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Remember, I showed you in the map, that was the journey that Yaakov had gone on, to where he crossed the Jordan to go up to Haran, rather than go through the hills and all of that of the northern part of what we now call Israel. Rather than go that route, he crossed over and went up into Haran on a different route that many caravans followed on their path, because he basically had nothing. So he needed to go where he could see others and be seen. So it goes on to say, they were coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with aromatic gum, healing resin, and opium on their way down to Egypt. Yehuda or Judah said to his brothers, what advantage is it to us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites or the Ishmaelites, instead of putting him to death, and with our own hands. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh. So Judah basically says we can't just leave him there, because in essence we would still be killing him. But if we sell him to them, then he'll be gone out of our hair and never to be seen again. And we know the plot that they had to kill a goat and take that coat that his father had made for him, that robe his father had made, and tell him that he had been destroyed. His brothers paid attention to Yehuda or Judah. So when the Midianites came, now where did they come from? Well, what we find out as you study other source material on this particular situation, Joseph is crying out. He's hollering and screaming, don't do this. What are you doing to me? Because this is his brothers who threw him down there to die. And he's hollering. And so what they do then is move away as far as they can so they don't have to hear it anymore. So they don't want to hear Joseph hollering. So they go further away from him. And then some Midianites who are also following this path that travelers or merchants used to go down into Egypt saw him, heard all that hollering, and took him out. Then found he was talking about his brother, so they then end up selling him to them, who then sold him to the Ishmaelites. Reuben then returned to the cistern, and upon seeing that Joseph wasn't in it, tore his clothes in mourning. He returned. Remember, his plot was to take him back to his father, basically tell on what his brothers were going to do and try to get back in good graces with his father. He returned to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I go now? Well, that's why their brothers didn't know where he was, because they went so far away because they didn't want to hear all this hollering and screaming that Joseph was doing. They didn't want to hear that. So they had gone away. They saw the Ishmaelites coming, and their focus was on them. But there was another group that came called the Midianites. And guess what? We'll touch up with Midianites once again. That's where Moses goes when he runs from Pharaoh. And that's where he married a Midianite. So all of these things we've seen intertwined through the scriptures, but because we don't study them properly or taught them properly, then we don't connect all these dots to see how things can practically be applied to our lives on today. See, they sold him for half a pound of silver shekels to the Ishmaelim, who then took Joseph on to Egypt. Reuben returned. Once he found out that he wasn't there, the brothers said they took Joseph's robe, killed a male goat, which they said they were going to do, dipped the robe in the blood. Then they sent the long sleeve robe, brought it to their father, saying, we found this. Do you know if it's your son's robe or not? Some cold blooded, his brothers is cold. He recognized it, meaning Yaakov recognized it and cried, it's my son's robe. Some wild animal has torn Joseph in pieces and eaten him. Yaakov tore his clothes and putting sackcloth around his waist, mourned for his son for many days. Though all his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, he refused. So in this instance, it lets us know that there were some girls other than just Dinah. He refused all consolation, saying, no, I will go down to the grave to my son mourning. And his father wept for him. In Egypt, the Midianim sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's officials, a captain of the guard. So now we're introducing the third part of our session to Potiphar, one of officials of the Pharaoh, head of the land. Interesting, because in the book of Jubilees, just to add some information to what we just read in the third part of our session, it goes in verses 12 through 18 of chapter 34 of Jubilees. And the sons of Jacob slaughtered a kid and dipped the coat of Joseph in the blood and sent it to Jacob their father on the 10th of the 7th month. And he mourned all that night. The 10th of the 7th month, a very important time, because it's the 10th of the 7th month that is Yom Kippur. So Jubilees is going to relate to how this becomes central to Messiah and what Messiah did. It goes on in verse 13 to say, and he mourned all that night, for they had brought it to him in the evening, and he became feverish with mourning for his death. And he said, an evil beast had devoured Joseph. And all the members of the house mourned with him that day, and they were grieving and mourning with him all that day. And his sons and his daughter rose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted for his son. And on that day, Bilhah heard that Joseph had perished, and she died mourning him. And she was living in Patratet. And Dinah, also his daughter, died after Joseph had perished. And there came these 3 mournings upon Israel in 1 month. Remember, we have the Day of Trumpets, then Yom Kippur, then Sukkot, all in the 7th month. And they buried Bilhah over against the tomb of Rachel, and Dinah also, his daughter, they buried there. Additional information. And he mourned for Joseph 1 year and did not cease, for he said, let me go down to the grave mourning for my son. Then it adds, for this reason it is ordained for the children of Israel that they should afflict themselves on the 10th of the 7th month, on the day that the news which made him weep for Yosef came to Yaakov, or Jacob his father, that they should make atonement for themselves thereon with a young goat. There's that goat. And what happens on Yom Kippur? Once again, there is two goats. One goat is killed and sacrificed, and the other goat is left out. So we see goat playing once again an important aspect of our lesson on tonight. On the 10th of the 7th month, that is Yom Kippur, once a year for their sins, for they have grieved, or they had grieved the affection of their father regarding Yosef, his son. So that added some information to our story and brought in some dates and times to help us understand. Once again, it's important for us to note that this information was being taught specifically and especially to the priestly line. They would get all these stories and understand all this information, and they would have passed, it was getting to them orally in most cases, and they would have passed it on to others wherever they could. And so no one was without understanding in this general area, the understanding that we're getting today in terms of the scriptures. Now we're going to go to the fourth part of our session, which is chapter 38, verses 1 through 30, that deal with Judah. The same brother that said, let's not kill him, let's sell him. Well, chapter 38 breaks away from Yosef and gets back to Judah. And there's many parts of this story that we're going to see that is also valuable to connect the dots as we go through our lesson. Right around this time, Jehudah, or Yehudah rather, or Judah, went off from his brothers and sisters, settled near a man named Hira, who was an Adullamite or Adullamite. There Yehudah saw one of the daughters of a certain Canaanite, not supposed to marry them. He was told that, yet and still he did it, whose name was Shua, and he took her and slept with her. She conceived and had a son, whom he named Er. She conceived again and had a son, and she called him Onan. She conceived yet again and had a son, whom she called Shelah. He was a Kazib when she gave birth to him. Yehudah took a wife for Er, his firstborn. Now, this whole concept was something that they were taught, but as we get into that concept, Judah wasn't a stranger to this information. He had been taught by his father and his grandfather, Isaac, concerning this particular ritual that we're going to hear in this story. Yehudah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. That is a whole lesson in of itself. Who was Tamar? And many believe that she was of a Shemite, and therefore she, in fact, who later becomes pregnant by Judah or Yehudah, could pass on a priestly kind of lineage. Because at this point, the first son, Er, didn't have any children. Er, Yehudah's firstborn, was evil from Jehovah's perspective, so Jehovah killed him. Don't know why, but he was evil. So he couldn't be the firstborn. Yehudah said to Onan, go and sleep with your brother's wife. Now that's his secondborn, right? Perform the duty of a husband brother to her and preserve your brother's line of descent. However, Onan knew that the child would not count as his, so whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground so as not to give his brother offspring. what he did was evil from Jehovah's perspective, so he killed him too. Now, once we see then that this information was very well known to Yehuda, and he is teaching this to his son. So all that he had been, many of the things, I shouldn't say all because I don't know that, but many of the things he had been taught, he's now passing on to his sons so that they could pass it on to their sons. However, as of yet, there are no sons because his first two sons died. Then we go on to verse 10. What he did was evil, and so he killed him. Then Yehuda said to Tamar's daughter-in-law, now his second son, Onan, did the same thing. And so therefore, Jehovah killed him as well. Then Yehuda said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, stay a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought, I don't want him to die too, like his brothers. So Tamar went and lived at home with her father. In due time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Yehuda, died. So Judah's wife now dies after Yehuda had been comforted, which would normally be a minimum of 30 days. He went up to be with his sheep shearers in Timnah. We find out that it was longer than a 30-day period. He and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. So he goes to shear the sheep of the pasture that he now has um, developed, and is the wealth that he's gained while he is there in this land. Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah, excuse me, to share his sheep. So she took off her widow's clothes, completely covered. So she was honoring what he had told her. She took off her widow's clothes, completely covered her face with her veil, and sat at the entrance to Enayim, which is on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she still was not being given to him as his wife. When Yehuda saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face. So he went over to her where she was sitting and said, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, come, let me sleep with you. She answered, just as if she was a prostitute. She responds, will you also? She goes, I'm sorry. She answered, what will you pay me to sleep with me? He said, I will send you a kid from the flock of goats. Goats are once again involved in this story. She said, will you also give me something as a guarantee until you send it? He answered, what should I give you as a guarantee? She said, your seal, which would be kind of a ring with its cord, and the staff you're carrying in your hand. So he gave them to her, then went and slept with her, and she conceived by him. She got up and went away, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothes. Verse 20, Yehuda sent the kid with his friend the Adulami to receive the guarantee items back from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He asked the people near where she had been. This is his friend, the Adulamite. Where is the prostitute who was on the road to Enayim? But they answered, there hasn't been any prostitute here. So he returned to Yehuda and said, I couldn't find her. Also, the people there said, there hasn't been any prostitute here. Yehuda said, all right, let her keep the things so that we won't be publicly shamed. I sent the kid, but you didn't find her. As we complete our first session, about 3 months later, which would be what? Time for her to be showing now in her stomach. Tamar, your daughter-in-law, about 3 months later, Yehuda was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been acting like a whore. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of her prostitution. She was supposed to keep on her widow's clothes at all times, which means she was not to be bothered, and that's why she was sent back to her father's home for him to watch out for her. When she was, Yehuda said, bring her out and let her be burned alive. When we get into the book of Leviticus, you're going to see that a priestly line, the priest was forbidden from marrying any kind of prostitute. So this is what would happen to a woman who got pregnant. She would be considered a prostitute and therefore was to be killed. Then when they bring her out, he says, she gives these items and says, determine, I beg you, whose these are. The signet, the cords, and the staff. Then Yehuda acknowledged owning them. He said, she is more righteous than I, because I didn't let her become the wife of my son, Shelah. And he never slept with her again. When she went into labor, it became evident that she was going to have twins. The same thing that came to Jacob is now being transferred through Yehuda. Twins. Jacob, Esau. Now we have twins being born to Tamar. As she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread on it, saying, this one came out first. So we see the same similitude of what happened between what? Yaakov and Esau. That Jacob got the priestly blessing, but Esau was, by the understanding of the culture, supposed to get it, even though Rebecca had been told that the younger one was going to be the priestly line. But he then withdrew his hand, and his brother came out. So she said, how did you manage to break out first? Therefore, he was named Peretz, breaking out. Then out came his brother with the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was given the name Zerah, or scarlet. So there's a whole lot in that. But anyway, in the understanding of the two goats during the temple time when the temple was standing on Yom Kippur, one thread would be tied on the doors to the tabernacle, scarlet. But once the goat was carried away and killed, then it was said that the thread would become white, a miracle helping the people understand their sins had been forgiven. Now we look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. It says, this is the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham, or Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Yitzhak was the father of Yaakov. Yaakov was the father of Yehuda and his brothers. Yehuda was the father of Perez and Zerach, and their mother was Tamar. So in the lineage of Yeshua is this Peretz, who is a descendant of Tamar, who were both, which are the children that Tamar had with Yehuda. So in the lineage of the Messiah, we see Peretz and Tamar being direct lineage to Yeshua, the Messiah. Let's get to we also have a portion of, no, we don't. So we're going to go now back to the story of Joseph. Chapter 39, verses 1 through 6 in the fifth part of our session. Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Yishmaelim or the Yishmaelim or the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. Jehovah was with Joseph, and he became wealthy while he was in the household of his master, the Egyptian. So Joseph was, in fact, an indentured servant working off but gaining wealth at the very time he was in the house of Potiphar. His master saw how Joseph was with him. How Jehovah was with him, that Jehovah prospered everything he did. Joseph pleased him as he served him, and his master appointed him manager of his household. He entrusted all of his possessions to Joseph. From the time he appointed him manager of his household and all his possessions, Jehovah blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. Jehovah's blessing was on all he owned, whether in the house or in the field. So he left all his possessions in Joseph's care, and because he had him, he paid no attention to his affairs. So, in other words, he was free to do all that he wanted to do, and at the same time was becoming increasingly wealthy and more valuable to Pharaoh. Now, Joseph was well built and handsome as well. We go on now to some additional information in the book of Jubilees. And in the 6th year of the week, so now we're in 2162. 2115 to 2162 is 45 years. So in this 45-year period for Yaakov, all of this has transpired in a period of 45 years. He calls his sons, Isaac then calls Yaakov and Esau, and they came to him, and he said unto them, My sons, I am going the way of my fathers, to the eternal house where my fathers are. Wherefore bury me near my father in the double cave in the field of Ephraim the Hittite, where Abraham purchased a sepulchre which I dig for myself. There bury me. So we're going back into the life of Isaac, who in our lesson last week had perished. But this is giving us some additional information in terms of time and the fact that information was passed on to Yaakov and Esau concerning what was expected of them by their father. He said, And this I command you, verse 3, my sons, that you practice righteousness and uprightness, so that Yah may bring upon you all that Yah said that he would do to Abraham and to his seed. And love one another, my sons, your brothers as a man who loves his own soul. And let each seek what he may benefit his brother, and act together on the earth. And let them love each other as their own souls. So this is what he's getting them to pledge that they would do. And even though it didn't stick with Esau, Yaakov was going to try to adhere to this situation. And concerning the question of idols, I command and admonish you to reject them and hate them, and love them not, for they are full of deception. For those that worship them, for those that bow down to them, you are not to do. Remember ye, my sons, Yah, Elohim of Abraham your father. So Jehovah, the Elohim of Abraham their father, and how I too worshiped him and served him in righteousness and in joy, that he might multiply you and increase your seed as the stars of heaven in multitude, and establish you on the earth as the plant of righteousness. So all of this is what the nation of Israel was to be. They are to be that people from which the understanding of the words of the Creator and what is expected of man could be transported to all. And this is the job that they have. And you are the plan of righteousness, which will not be rooted out until all generations forever. So this information was passed on by Isaac to them, and it helps us understand some of the things that we're seeing, because it would look as if How did they know these things? This is how, because it was passed on to them orally, and they in turn would swear to do it. And so when they didn't do it, that was sin. Go back to our prophet Amos and what he told the nation of Israel what would happen to them. And that is what happened. Why? Because they were unrighteous, and so they were rooted out of the land. Now we're going to go into the sixth part of our lesson. In the sixth part of our lesson, which is from Genesis 39, I see I put on there 29. It's Genesis 39, verses 7 through 23. And we'll also have some information from, and we just did 9, 1 through 6. How am I doing again? Oh no, that's 36, 1 through 6. This is 39, 1 through 6. Okay. So with that, let's go to the sixth part of our session. Chapter 39, verses 7 through 23. So we'll have 2 slides for that. In time, the day came when his master's wife took a look at Yosef. We're back with Yosef now, and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused, saying to his master's wife, "Look, because my master has me, he doesn't know what's going on in this house. He has put all his possessions in my charge. In this house, I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against Elohim?" But she kept pressing him day after day. Nevertheless, he didn't listen to her. He refused to sleep with her or even be with her. However, one day when he went into the house to do his work and none of the men living in the house was there indoors, she grabbed him by his robe. There's that robe situation again, and it said, "Sleep with me." But he fled, leaving his robe in her hand, and got himself outside. When she saw that he had left his robe in her hand and had escaped, she called the men of her house and said to them, "Look at this. My husband brought in a Hebrew to make fools of us. He came in and wanted to sleep with me, but I yelled out loudly." We highlighted some parts of this because of additional information that can be gained from other sources as you study this lesson more intently. And basically, we see that Joseph was teaching concerning the ways that he had learned from his father and his grandfather. So he was teaching those things to the household, along with demonstrating that by not sleeping with her. As we complete the sixth part of our session, when he heard me yelling like that, this is what Potiphar's wife says, he left his robe with me and ran out. She put the robe aside until his master came home. Then she said to him, "This Hebrew slave you brought us came in to make a fool of me. But when I yelled out, he left his robe with me and fled outside." When his master heard what his wife said as she showed him, "This is what your slave did to me," he became furious. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison in the place where the king's prisoners were kept. And there he was in the prison. So unjustly accused of something, Yeshua was unjustly accused by the leaders at that particular time and killed for what he did. Joseph is not going to be killed, but we see similarities in what the jealousy and all those other things that are transpiring in this story concerning Joseph. Verse 23, the prison warden paid no attention to anything Joseph did because Jehovah was with him. So even in this scenario, Jehovah is there protecting and guiding and influencing what happens with Joseph. Whatever he did, once again, began to come to the favor of the head of the prison. So when we go to Jubilees, we're going to learn some additional information. And Jacob dwelt in the land of his father, sojourned in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. It's interesting that it says these are the generations, or this is where he dwelt, but there's more. This is the transition now. The transition is going from Jacob to Yosef. And so we're going to see more information about Yosef in the form of a story than anywhere else in the Torah. Yosef was 70 years old when they took him down to the land of Egypt, and Potiphar, what they said was a eunuch of Pharaoh, the chief cook, bought him. So now it said, these are all the things that Pharaoh was head over. And he set Joseph over his house, and the blessing of Yah came upon the house of the Egyptian on account of Joseph, and Yah prospered him in all that he did. And the Egyptian committed everything into the hands of Joseph, for he saw that Yah, or Jehovah, was with him, and that Yah prospered him in all that he did. Then, and Joseph's appearance was comely, and very beautiful was his appearance. And his master's wife lifted up her eyes and saw Joseph, and she loved him and besought him to lie with her. But he did not surrender his soul, and he remembered Yah and the words which Jacob, his father, used to read from amongst the words of Abraham. So once again, these teachings were transferred, and in some cases, what? Written down, that no man should commit fornication with a woman who has a husband, and that for him the punishment of death has been ordained in the heavens before the Most High Elohim. We'll see that in Leviticus when it talks about the priestly line. So this information is being, as we go through the story of what's going on in Joseph's mind, he is what? Believed to be carrying on the priestly lineage. So he can't do anything like that because the punishment for him is death. And the sin will be recorded against him in the eternal books continually before Yah or Jehovah. So just get that additional information in verse 6 concerning why Joseph continued to behave as he did, because he understands these things. And not only that, he's not only teaching them, but he's doing them. So as we conclude our lesson, the seventh part of our session says, sometime later, verse 4, while Joseph is in prison, it came about that the Egyptian king's cupbearer and baker gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh became angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, in the same place where Joseph was kept. The captain of the guard charged Joseph to be with them, and he became their attendant while they remained in prison. So in this instant, they're in prison while what? It's almost like being in jail while information is being gathered concerning what it is that Pharaoh wasn't happy about. And so that gives us some insight into why these two men were there, and they weren't killed for what, because it's being investigated. One night, the two of them, the king of the Egypt's cupbearer and his baker, there in prison, both had dreams, each dream with its own meaning. Joseph came into them in the morning and saw that they looked sad. He asked Pharaoh's officers there with him in the prison of his master's house, "Why are you looking so sad today?" They said to him, "We each had a dream, and there's no one around who can interpret it." The importance of dreams. Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to Elohim? Tell it to me." So he's basically saying only Jehovah can interpret properly dreams. So he says, I'm going to consult him. So tell it to me, because well, I've had dreams and I got some interpretation of those dreams. Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. In my dream, there in front of me was a vine, and the vine had 3 branches. The branches budded, then it suddenly began to blossom, and finally clusters of ripe grapes appeared. The chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. In my dream, there in front of me was, blossom, and finally clusters of grapes appeared. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and gave the cup to Pharaoh. Joseph said to him, here is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will be giving Pharaoh his cup as you used to when you were his cupbearer. So you're going to be found innocent, and in fact, you're going to return to your position. Then he gets into verse 14. We're going all the way to 23. He says, but remember me when it goes well with you and show me kindness, please, and mention me to Pharaoh so that he will release me from this prison. Why would it? Because that's where evidence is gathered concerning situations that Pharaoh is concerned about. And in this particular situation, Joseph said, if you investigate more, you'll find out that I'm innocent. Well, the truth is that I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. And here too, I have done nothing wrong that would justify putting me in this dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I too, in my dream, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the uppermost basket, there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh. But the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. Joseph answered, here is its interpretation. So once again, Joseph just gonna tell it. And we see that in this instance, he says, here is the interpretation. These 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off of you. He will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a party for all his officials, and he lifted up the head of the cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer back to his position so that he again gave Pharaoh his cup. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Nevertheless, the cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, but forgot him. So that concludes our lesson for tonight. With that, let's get back to our shared screen, see if there's any questions you may have that I could maybe give you some insight on. I don't see any. So with that, we're going to give the priestly blessing and conclude our lesson for tonight. We hold out our hands towards each other. May Jehovah bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom. So I'll see you next week for lesson number 10. And with that, shalom. I don't know, my brother, you still going to the hospital? Let me know. Knock on the wall or something.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm into what you're saying, man. I'm still muted, but yeah, I'm gonna be ready to go in a minute.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Good lesson.
Yep.
Yep.